Luyanda Botha, the man who raped and murdered UCT student Uyinene Mrwetyana, has been sentenced to life behind bars. The Western Cape High Court sentenced him to 3 life sentences. He received an additional 5 years for defeating the ends of justice. Botha will not be eligible for parole for the next 25 years. He's confessed to killing the 19-year-old student in August and also led police to the place where he had buried her body. Botha lured Mrwetyana to the Klein Ridge post office where he worked. He said he then raped and murdered her. Uyinene's charred body was found in a shallow grave in Khayelitsha a week after she had gone missing. All right, so we get reaction now on the story. I have in studio with me Luke Lamprecht. He's the advocacy manager at Women and Men Against Child Abuse. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Now, the reaction to the sentence, I mean, there's been really a debate of late happening about people being sentenced to life imprisonment. But the issue around parole has always been a very thorny one for activists. So in this case, we understand that you would have to stay behind bars for 25 years before you could be considered for parole.
Correct. So I think the judiciary is setting very good precedents in the last few cases we've seen around the length of the sentences. Must remember that when it's handed over for parole, it becomes a correctional services mandate. And the thing that we are sort of fighting against with the Correctional Services Parole Board is the fact that it's a very closed process. So up until the time a victim gets to testify, which in this case there wasn't, but in other sexual offences there are, the system is very, very offender-centred, so on the rights of the offender. When convicted, he goes to correctional services and then they have a board that grants parole. They should consult with the victims. In this case, there is no victim. Will the parents still be around? Will they be traceable? And why should the victims have to prove something to the parole board in order for that person not to get parole? For us, it should be that accused should show remorse. They should show that they've attended programs, that they've been rehabilitated, that they've been corrected, and it should be an open process so society can see why parole was granted. We have a case also in the Cape at the moment where someone out on parole is now accused of raping a 16-year-old girl.
And I suppose that speaks a lot about rehabilitation programs.
100%.
Yeah. So questions have also been raised on this particular case, more so on the pace in which this case was resolved. A lot of people saying that it may have been because it was prominent, it was all over the news. But also when you look at the details of this particular case, really the accused came clean, he confessed to the crimes.
Okay, so first of all, generally the criminal justice process is a very, very long process. And in this case where you have got a confession, to be able to speed it up is reliant on the fact that they believe that there is a strong enough case. For example, the same as in the Nono case. There's video evidence, there's evidence that the police have collected, and that evidence is so strong that the accused looks and says, I can't possibly answer to this. So they make confessions. And then the system is very, very fast and acts very efficiently. And there is no doubt in my mind that pressure by the media and advocacy groups does change the way that courts and police and the National Prosecuting Authority behave in cases, because they call them high-profile cases, and the best of the best get to work on the high-profile cases.
Yeah, and of course, I suppose this would mean that activism work really starting to yield some positive results now. But also, remember the emergency plan launched by the President to look at gender-based violence. Really, one could also say that it may have contributed, because part of what it was aimed to achieve was exactly this, to make sure that the justice system is efficient and effective.
Indeed, it's one of the 5 main pillars of the emergency plan, and the fact that it's now called an emergency plan is a bit sort of disconcerting to me, because I've been doing this for 27 years. So this has been going on throughout the whole history of the criminal justice system. I think the fact that the President has placed emphasis on it, said that the people within the criminal justice system need to behave in ways that are victim-centered, has changed the way that I think they're approaching cases, in terms of saying we need to get justice, and society needs to be perceived as the judiciary is dispensing justice. Otherwise, we are seeing many vigilante cases where society is going out to dispense its own justice. So we need to be seen as a society to be dispensing justice to those who harm those who are vulnerable.
And I know the question that I always put to you is, would the sentence serve as a deterrent to other perpetrators? I'm just going to rephrase it today and say, what do we do now? How do we stop reacting to incidents such as this and start being proactive as the nation?
Absolutely. So the first part, or the first point in the President's emergency plan is prevention. Now, prevention goes to very, very deep-seated issues in society, and they go to issues of masculinity, toxic masculinity, patriarchy, misogyny, etc., etc. So if all of us who are kind of the older generation like myself, we need to say there will be no more Me Too movement when my children are grown up. We should never have adults who are coming back and saying to me, when I was a child something happened and I couldn't talk. But the only way we're going to achieve that is, first of all, by protecting our children and looking after our children and creating a system that is responsive to children early on, rather than just being responsive when we get the product of a system like a Nano or a Botha.
But how do we get there? I know that NGOs are very, this is a topic close to their heart, but how do we get to that particular point? Because a lot of NGOs came out to actually say that, listen, even government itself is not united on this matter. They work in the different government departments are working in silos. So until they all come together, then we'd start to see perhaps some difference.
There's no doubt. Because if you look at, for example, the failure of early childhood development or the failure of a social grant support system leads to children being underfed. Children who are underfed contributes to children being violent. Children who don't have good role models end up behaving like the role models they've had. So it's an entire social change, and that should be led by a united government. I mean, I've been in forums with the child protection forums in Joburg where I can't even get all the departments to put their logos on one poster because they don't know whose budget they need to take it from. So the idea of crossing over and working within one another's spaces and spheres of influence, we're not saying that the social workers must control the police, but we're saying where we overlap, there has to be a common understanding of what we are trying to achieve, and I think we're a long way from achieving that.
But with this emergency plan, is it likely to address this? Because I think that's part of what the President had said.
Absolutely, I'm hoping so, because if we recognize, even though we work from different paradigms like the adversarial justice system and the more reconciliatory social system, if we all work together to say, this is my sphere of influence, what in my sphere of influence can I influence in order to prevent, and if I can't prevent, how do I react appropriately to minimize the risk to these children from being abused in the system that we expose them to.
All right, look, time constraints. We'll leave it at this for today. Thank you so much for coming through. All right, well, there you have it. That's Luke Lamprecht. He is advocacy manager at Women and Men Against Child Abuse, giving reaction, of course, to the news that Luyanda Botha, the man who raped and murdered UCT student Uyinene Mrwetyana, has been given sentenced to life behind bars earlier today.